Say to my bride, let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the Speed Meter Steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill, and you'll find that in most history books, Carl Benz is credited for inventing the modern automobile, with Gottlieb Daimler given an honorable mention. Yet de Dion Bouton, who had made personal motor carriages for over a year before Benz or Daimler ever hit the road, are scarcely mentioned. It's because the de Dion Bouton cars were steam-powered as opposed to being blessed with an internal combustion engine. And some of the same kind of steam versus gas rivalry affected the credit of who was the first to build a production car in Australia. Like de Dion, Herbert Thompson did build a legitimate make of car, but was steam-powered, and thus much credit that he is due has been denied him. The man whom many would credit with Australia's first make of car was a well-known man of much prestige down under. And many, if not most, automotive historians credit with producing Australia's first true modern production car, Harley Tarrant. Harley was born in Clunes, a small town in Victoria, Australia, in 1860. His father, Joseph, was a local miner that came to the town as a result of the gold rush in Victoria. Joseph also owned and published some local newspapers, the Clunes Gazette, the St. Kilda Chronicle, and the Prahan Chronicle. Young Harley was an energetic young man, tall, athletic, and intelligent. He was a good student, finishing his primary education early, and by the age of 20 had his degree in civil engineering. His first job was as a land surveyor, being sent to survey a large area called the Nullarbor Plain. Folks who are familiar with southern Australia will know that this over 70,000 square mile region has just about nothing in it. No hills, trees, water, so it took quite a bit of bushcraft and Aboriginal help to complete the survey. He completed the task in 1884 and then went to work for the New South Wales Department of Lands. For the next 4 years, Tarrant was all over the state of New South Wales, surveying property lines, exploring and documenting unincorporated land, and, of course, surveying for city planning. New South Wales was the most populous and economically strong of any state in Australia at the time, and Harley was kept quite busy. However, he had a rather independent spirit, and in 1888 left his job to establish his own civil engineering and surveying firm, hanging up his shingle in Melbourne. He found a fast customer in Melbourne and Metropolitan Board of Works, and his company prospered. By the mid-1890s, Harley Tarrant was a well-off and well-respected surveyor who knew southern Australia like the back of his hand. Australia of the late 19th century did not have any road networks to speak of, or even a developed railroad network like could have been found in the USA of the time. Getting around the outback was not easy, and Harley began to consider whether the latest invention, the car, could be the solution. He correctly reasoned at the time that electric cars would not work. There's no place to charge them. Steam cars also had severe limitations. Both water and fuel for the boiler were scarce in the region. So Tarrant turned his attention to the internal combustion engine. He partnered up with a friend of his, a local bicycle maker named Howard Lewis, and together created the Tarrant Motor and Engineering Company. Harley designed the engine while Howard worked on the rest of the drive chain. The car was completed in 1897. Harley's engine ran on kerosene as opposed to a higher octane fuel, and the reason was quite simple. It was cheap and plentiful. Unfortunately, the car itself was not a success. It lacked both the power and ruggedness needed for Australia's unforgiving terrain. However, the engine itself was a good one and perfect as a stationary or portable engine to run pumps and other small appliances. Tarrant began to offer the engines for sale, and they sold like hotcakes all over Australia. Having made quite some money selling his engines, Harley decided to give cars a try again. He first became one of the first car dealers in Australia, selling Benz cars from his Melbourne facility in 1900. The following year, he decided to go back into auto production himself with an all-Australian-made car. Yet his kerosene engines were still not powerful enough to carry the extremely stout chassis that he and Lewis designed. So they used a Benz engine for his prototype. So Harley went back to the drawing board to design a new engine for his car, and it would hit the streets of Melbourne in 1903. This 4-cylinder, 12-horsepower car was almost exactly what Australia needed. The car was massively overbuilt to survive whatever the terrain threw at it. 3-speed transmission driving the rear wheels through chains, it was not built for speed, but rather for survivability, and survive it did. Production began in earnest shortly after. The Tarrant performed well in local trials, proving to the Australian people that a car could be built down under for the people down under. The big challenge for the Tarrant car was the price. It was a luxury car with a luxury price tag, over $1,200 Australian, and only about a dozen or so were ever sold. Henry Ford was building cars that were also suitable for the outback and could do it for way less money than Harley could, who ceased production in 1907 and opened the first Ford dealership in Australia. He continued to be a strong advocate for the automobile industry, even leading the Australian Volunteer Automobile Corps to devise how cars could be useful to the Army. By the beginning of World War I, he was an Army colonel as a result of this. Harley Tarrant was the first in Australia to build an internal combustion engine car and the first to bring such a car into production in Australia. And if you find yourself in the Museums Victoria, you can take a look at a surviving Tarrant car, the car designed to survive anything. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.